This episode of the Quality Impact Podcast is proudly sponsored by Catalyst Consulting, specialists in Lean Six Sigma, operational excellence, and business transformation solutions. Catalyst Consulting helps organizations achieve lasting success through customized training, consultancy, and support.
In today's AI-driven world, data is more than just numbers. It's the fuel for smarter, faster, and more ethical decisions. But unlocking its full potential requires more than technology. In this episode, we explore what it really means to activate data, where data quality fits into AI, and how organizations can balance innovation with governance. From leadership mindset shifts to practical advice for quality professionals, we cut through the hype to uncover what it takes to make AI adoption purposeful, responsible, and built to last. In today's episode, we are joined by Richard Corderoy, the CEO of Oakland. Richard is leading the charge in transforming how some of the UK's biggest companies unlock value from data. Hi, Richard.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining this episode. Let's dive straight in. What does liberating data actually mean in the age of AI, and how does Oakland do it differently?
So I think that there's a huge amount of noise and chat and general nonsense sometimes on this topic. Liberating data is as simple as how do you use data to add value? Assuming you're either business or government, value is about improving performance, improving the bottom line, improving customer satisfaction, and looking after the planet and social and ethical obligations around. Liberating data needs to start there, as does AI, as does everything we do. I think the observation for Oakland would be we've been involved in business transformation for 40 years now through the various waves of quality and process. And really, we have grabbed data because it is the next frontier to bring that value to bear in our views. There's a huge amount of data. Most of us have spent perhaps 20 years wrestling our structured data, those big databases, into something that makes shape. I think all the reams of email and all that other stuff we have, if we could get into that and help businesses know what they have, make better decisions, you ultimately drive more value. None of this matters until someone either makes a better decision, customer gets better service, or some person as part of a process does something differently. And so much of the conversation is often about data and technology and AI. Let's have the conversation about how we actually bring that value to bear.
So it is starting at the end. Let's talk about value. What is it you want? And then you walk backward to map out how you're gathering the data and how you work with the technology to get to that value.
I think so. And to be fair, for almost anyone watching this, I'm sure that's completely normal and logical. It seems in the world of AI, we've lost our heads a bit and thrown everything we think we know out and have just started with, I have a hammer, what can I hit? And funnily enough, it causes a lot of mess and damage and perhaps doesn't get much done. Yeah, let's get back to what we know works.
Back to basics. You work with some of the UK's largest companies. What's the number one data or AI challenge they bring to your door right now?
I think data is the complexity. Big firms, you don't even have to be that big to suddenly have an awful lot of data and to drown in that complexity. I think most firms by now will have had an attempt or two to grab that. They've probably put in some new technology, a different platform, moved to the cloud, all of those good things, and are a bit stumped with perhaps how to get the full value they anticipated from that. And then just as they're wrestling with that, AI's come along, which does offer headlines, a ton of capability that didn't exist only 2 or 3 years ago. It seems very cool. It's tantalizing close to get quite a long way quite quickly. And there's a bunch of people saying you should be doing stuff with it or you'll be left behind. Firms are wrestling with the desire to lean into that, not wanting to be left behind or disrupted out of the marketplace, but deep down, not being quite sure of where it fits or what they can do. And so all of that is coming to bear at the same time as inevitably the pressures around and we can't keep spending money on all of this stuff forever. How do we do it in an efficient way that gets things done fairly quickly?
And it's any other business proposal really, or user case for organizations. There is a business case. People need to understand what's the pain point they want to address. And to your words, let's start with the value. But definitely with AI, there has been a hype there has been of, I don't want to be left behind. And that panic sometimes clouds the right decision of why are we embarking on such a program or such a project.
And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with the chief exec or the marketing director coming in and going, look, we found this new thing. Let's go over there. Some people can start to play with it to figure out what it is. But let's not rush to do that. Let's be very measured in what's the difference between a sandpit where you're playing and experimenting and seeing the art of the possible and actually backing that into something that actually has a business case and some value and fits amongst boring stuff like security or those other things that you have to do in the technology space.
Essential. Oakland is a hands-on partner through the data lifecycle for organizations. How do you balance innovation with governance, especially when implementing AI programs?
So it's a really interesting one. And you're right. Like our strap line is everything data. And that starts with data strategy, not strategy for data, but how can data help your business strategy? That moves through data engineering and platforms and moving the stuff around. That then goes to governance and management, which are similar but different things. And only then do you get to data products and AI and that sits on top. So we would absolutely go data governance is a thing, and it's probably still the thing that frustrates organizations the most. Unless you know what data you have, you know what shape it's in, you know who owns it, you know where it is, all of that kind of fundamental stuff, then funnily enough, doing anything advanced is really hard. But also it is a bit like painting the fourth bridge, and you can spend years analyzing governance down to the nth degree and not really adding much value. And I think we had this in the process profession a few years back. What level do you process map to? We've all seen that room you went in with ring binders full of every process in the business mapped, probably £1 million worth of work to produce it all. And well, does anyone ever look at them, and are they up to date, and are they worth the paper they're written? Well, no, of course not. There's too detailed. And okay, so process and one box on a sheet of paper isn't enough, but going to hundreds of volumes with nth levels of detail probably is too much. And it depends what your process is doing, of course, but so you need an appropriate level. And governance for data is exactly the same. What are you governing? What are the risks around it? And how can you get going by improving governance, improving management, which I'll throw in alongside it, and find a way of doing that and getting value fairly quickly? Because certainly the thing that we're not seeing is there is no appetite for the multi-year, give us 3 years and a load of money and we'll come back with something built. The world's moved on from that. So you have to fly these planes in parallel. Is it different for AI? In a sense, no. In a sense, yes. I think AI does, because the tools being deployed are new and fairly immature, it's very difficult to make some assumptions around it. Actually, what we've found is when we're exploring the use of AI, you sometimes pick cloud governance in particular. We had an organization very keen that all of their data is kept inside the UK. And we sort of said, one of these AI agents is actually working in Amsterdam, and they were quite distressed about this. And you go, actually, it's not that the agent's in Amsterdam, it's that a load of your processing already happens over there. You just didn't know. And so as you explore the AI element of governance, I think sometimes you realize the edges of what you already have. And then you actually have the question of, is that a problem and what's being processed and can we live with it? And interestingly, you could.
I think it brought the topic of cross borders or borderless operation a lot to focus, because now organizations are really trying to understand where their data is housed and what parts of their data is being processed in which country. And because it's becoming a lot of that, I believe that sort of social responsibility to make sure they're storing their data correctly, adhering to their customer base and protecting all of that. It's no longer a black box. People want to make sure there is light on that black box, so it's no longer hidden and unknown and it's brought to surface.
I completely agree, but it is interesting. One is the cloud vendors don't necessarily make it easy to know where your data is. The whole essence of the cloud is that you hand it over to the data centers globally that the cloud providers balance between. And that's why you get it at the price you do. If you really want to guarantee national sovereignty or whatever, you're going to have to find either on-prem or go for a different data center solution. So that is easier said than done. I do also think there's an interesting bit, back to my point. Are we suddenly applying a higher threshold than we would have for our traditional data anyway? because actually there's a load of stuff happening today as organizations process customer data or do whatever it is they do, which everyone is comfortable with. And often is the AI that just asks the awkward question, because people tend to ask it a bit more forcefully, that uncovers some perhaps practices that are already going on. And certainly we've seen a little bit of that.
And with that in mind, we know that AI is moving fast. How do you help your clients cut through the noise and make smart, ethical decisions around their adoption?
Yeah, let's start with the ethical decisions first. There's a lot said about AI, and it seems to be a card that people pull out. Firstly, as an organization, do you know what ethical means? And that's a massive question. Is it who you work with, where your data is? Is it ethical to everyone? Who gets to decide? Within Oakland, we take every new client through an ethics onboarding process, which decides basically whether we want to work with them or not. And it's fascinating because you go, things that I wouldn't want to work with, many of the team are very comfortable with, and vice versa. And where does this fit in your current ethical processes? That should cover 80% of the load. I think you can pick your battles in AI where you are less likely to trip across either ethical or implementation issues. So if you're building expert tools for internal use, that's generally fairly safe. If you're building expert tools to do mission critical, I wouldn't be using AI for that right now. If I'm doing, well, that's not ethical, that's just technologically practical. But then likewise, if I'm suddenly getting into profiling my team or profiling my customer base or doing things like that, then clearly bias in the data and how you train it and how you set it up does become a much, much bigger thing. My final question, though, would be, again, are we holding AI to a different level of ethics to what we already do? Obviously, this is an international audience. We're a UK-based firm. We employ UK-based people generally who have been through the UK or European education system. When they read a CV, they read it through that lens. We probably don't have enough genuinely global perspective on how we hire. So that bias exists in our organization today, and we do our best to get rid of it, but we all have that bias. So probably we shouldn't be that aghast that the AI tools that we bring in might have similar traits, and we can choose what to do about them. Again, it's a really interesting kind of area where suddenly we seem to hold the technology to a higher standard than we do for our normal lives.
What I've heard you say throughout your support to those organizations to remove this noise is really the activity, the benefit of it goes beyond implementing AI or working with their data. It's really helping them take a moment and pause and ask all of those important questions that feed into their governance that I'm sure they all benefit from, even if they didn't embark on an AI adoption program, because it's helping the board, helping the team really stop and say, yes, this is how we deal with this. This is our views on, which is really a great value add. Has the response been really that positive, or do they really just hone down onto the AI implementation?
I think if we're honest, most people do start with the AI implementation, and often these slightly more prosaic debates seem to happen in parallel. And depending on the organization, the debates stop everything. And I think as quality professionals, one of the dangers is don't be on the sidelines debating about whether we should be playing football whilst the team is halfway through the match. We're sometimes guilty of that. I think the bit, though, jump to the ethics bit. If we go to how do you help them cut through the noise, one of the things we do is we try and stop talking about AI. AI is a bit like, should we adopt electricity? Yes, it's the wonder source of energy, and it's going to transform the world. When it was first discovered or implemented, the light bulbs were rubbish and broke every 2 minutes. Did anyone foresee how we use electricity today? Of course not. And AI feels as a genus is too big a thing. I don't know how you compare the packaged Copilot that arrives because Microsoft have flipped a switch or IT's flipped a switch on your desktop versus something you develop yourself, but a bit like a spreadsheet or Power BI, something most users could have a go at, versus AI that's built into your core applications, project planning tools or customer service tools, versus bespoke AI doing medical diagnosis support or whatever. Just to call it all AI, I suppose everything I've said, there's electricity, isn't it? Electricity is powering my phone and running the scanner in the hospital. If you just say, what are you going to do with electricity? It's not really a helpful question. So I think putting the word down and going, where do you have problems? And fundamentally, why are you adopting AI? Where do you have problems and opportunities in your business? What might the solutions to those be? And sometimes those solutions might involve a new technology called AI. sometimes it won't. One of the projects I'm most proud of at Oakland, we do pure play AI implementation. We've got one or two now where we are helping customers with a data classification problem. We've got quite a clever AI module doing reading and scanning and talking to the internet. That's invisible to the customer. It's just a tool that is helping get the answer, and the value they want is to be able to restructure the way they think about their products and put them in different categories. Let's focus on that. And if the best tool is AI, then great. If the best tool is an intern, then great. If the best tool is a bit of Excel, then great. Back to my hammer analogy. Let's stop looking for things to hit and let's use the right tool for the job.
It is starting where we began this conversation, liberating data. Let's talk about value. Let's start at the end and then walk through to support them. Where does data quality fit into Oakland's approach to AI? And how do you make sure that the foundations are solid before layering in tech?
I think data quality is a brilliant, I do like banning words, and data quality is obviously a thing, and it's the thing that everyone loves to go, we're really bad at. I think you then have to ask a couple of questions of why is your data quality bad? Is your database just corrupting things overnight because it feels like it should do that? And obviously sometimes that does happen, but that's a vanishingly rare problem with data quality. 9 times out of 10, data quality is because it's not organized, it's not been captured properly, which actually takes you straight fairly quickly out of data, out of technology and into business process land. Our data quality is rubbish. That's because you're not entering it properly. Our customer views really confused. That's because 3 different people own your customer. And I could go on. And so the challenge of this is when you say it's data quality, it sounds like it's a problem that either the data team or, depending on your business, IT should fix. The inconvenient truth is it probably means your processes aren't quite under control, and good old fashioned quality process improvement stuff might actually be of more value than a big data project.
I totally understand that. And Professor John Oakland, in one of his books, and I don't quote him word by word, but to the essence was, if you look at everything that life hits at you or brings to you as a process, you will be able to solve it, you'll be able to address it. And this is the same thing as instead looking at the problem as it's the data quality problem. If you really step back and look into the whole process end to end, you'll be able to identify the true problems.
Yes, and I know that doesn't mean you go down the bad process route of a room full of books that no one ever looks at. It's appropriate process for what you want. If this bit of data, you're a utility, either a usage data, safety data, or leakage data, or pollution data, if it's really important to you, then how does it relate to the real world activity that fixes it, maintains it, and looks after it? If you can't answer that question, then the AI is never going to help. Even if I can produce a really clever AI or data product, who does something with it? I mean, you look at utilities that go out and fix stuff, I can tell them where it's going to break, perhaps. But if I can't get that back into the process where the teams in the bands actually go out and tackle the right place at the right time, then it's just an interesting sideshow. I think there is a lot of AI that sometimes sits in the corner of the room. In the early days of computers, no one really knew what to do with it. But when the chief exec and the visitors came round, the cover came off and we turned it on to prove how advanced we were. I'm afraid there is some of that. And I'm being a bit disingenuous because that's the parody of getting it wrong. The parody of getting it right is you don't know you've got it. The systems just work. The daily tool that decides which teams go in where will be loaded up that night with the output of AI and no doubt a bit of human input. And it's just integrated and it's a thing. And that's how you get value because whatever you're fixing stuff quicker. The less it's a chat interface in the corner and the more integrated it is, I would argue that's the route to value.
Start at the end, define your value, your problem, make sure it's integrated and help the business see the use case of it. So this is all really brilliant. As we said, AI is progressing a lot fast. Have you seen a mindset shift with leaders? And if you have, what would you say are the top traits of leaders who get it right?
So I think the leaders who get it right have started to really get their heads around the different types of AI that exist. Am I putting desktop agents or desktop copilot, whatever, help people write emails better, organize their diary? Lovely stuff. The evidence is the adoption is a bit patchy, through to really quite bleeding edge AI development that's quite hard to do. And that's really great. It's interesting. You go, well, is that generally where your organization operates? Are you a bleeding edge organization, or do you tend to follow along? The bit where I think most people seem to be, and this is calling out the future a bit, is around the buzzword of agentic AI. And for me, this is the way to understand the value. So agentic AI is where you create really quite narrow, quite niche AI tools that do a particular job quite well and use these as a network of agents to produce an outcome. From a technology point of view, because each one in turn is quite simple, they're relatively easy to build. And in a sense, this is an extension of what we've been doing in society for the last 50 years or more, where we take a complicated task, break it down into a mixture of process, technology, and people, and we're quite explicit with roles of how people operate, and that produces a machine that's much more complicated than any of the parts within it. I think agentic AI offers a similar opportunity. Where are there bits of process that either happen at huge volume and are a bit mindless, or where if only we could, but it would be prohibitive to afford that agent to do that if it was a human being. I often talk about agents as smart interns. So could I employ 50 people to constantly read our library of customer complaints or comments or product defects? It gets prohibitive quite quickly, but I could put a couple of agents on that, which not quite free because you still got to pay for them, but comparatively free. And so I can start to build these things up that do a job of work. And they're less about the chat interface, they're less about all of that stuff, and it's building, and the nice thing for me, the opportunity for the quality profession, process professions, and improvement professions is this is what we've been doing for a great many years. You don't actually have to get hugely into the tech. I think you do have to know a bit about data, but you don't have to get hugely into it. You just have to think about how would you solve this problem if I brought a different resource mix on that. And it isn't that every human gets replaced by a robot. It's about picking where are there bits in the process you can automate, where are there bits in the process you can automate using traditional RPA or logic-based automation, where do you still need a human intervention, but actually can we build this network up to do something? Once you've got the foundations in, you build that network and it's doing something, hopefully you can prove the value fairly quickly, and then you can build the next task and the next task and the next task. For those who aren't building applications that are all about getting AI in, and the technology companies doing that, that's great, that's their thing. But if you are everyone else in the real world business just trying to do a bit better, this is an opportunity. This is where I think things are going to flow over the next couple of years, because it's much easier to get your head around. It's much easier to build a project around. It's much easier to prove the value from. And then as you do that, for that bit of process you're in, you're going to have to solve the data governance challenge. You're going to have to figure out who your data owners are. You're going to have to sort out the quality challenge, but only do that for the bit you're in. This isn't proof of concepts. This is building value, but in a limited way.
I know you touched base earlier about a project that you're very proud of. And I'm wondering if we can tap a little bit into that, just have that practical user case of a situation. What was the organization trying to achieve? How did you in Oakland help that organization fix that problem? And what was the added value in the end?
Yeah, I can't unfortunately say who it is, but they are a large sales organization. They sell tens, if not hundreds of thousands of different products. They wanted to be able to better categorize which product family those things sat within. Their traditional way of doing that kind of did it one way, but they didn't quite mix with a desire to count it in a different way. But there's many years worth of data. They want to move over to this kind of new way of basically putting things into a dozen buckets. And so how do you do that? This is where the agent bit fits in, because you go, look, I could pay an intern to read every product. And actually what they have to do is read the product. It may be obvious from what it is, or they may have to literally Google it or go to the supplier website, see what the supplier says it is, then do a bit of thinking about which category it might go in, update the data record, park it and move on. Do that, repeat 50,000 times. And so you can go, hang on, can we do that in a way where we could either break that up into multiple agents, in fact, that can take the basic data you've got, read it. Sometimes it was in a system, sometimes it was off a PDF document. Organize what you know. One of them goes off and searches the internet. One of them goes off and searches the supplier company. One of them reads the records that sit in the notes about it. And they then effectively have an agent meeting with a coordinator that goes, hang on, based on what you said, 2 out of 3 of you are saying this and that. And based on this, we're going to categorize it like that. What's interesting is it's a process that accepts a failure rate. If I paid interns to do it, they would get 5-10% wrong. If we're only getting 1 or 2% wrong, that's fine. And you then have another process when someone eventually spots it and goes, oh, we've got that wrong. Fine, we'll fix it. But let's not try and go for 100%. Let's go for something where you can set sensible tolerances. That was mainly dragging an old data set into the future. The problem is still there. As new products are added, are they being added correctly? Are they being categorized appropriately? The process still runs on every new product that gets put onto their database. We've got rid of most of the interns now. We need a couple left in the background that periodically look at the last 50 products that have been added, give them a clean check they've been categorized correctly, and push them into the main system. It was really important to understand why they wanted to do and what they were trying to achieve. And actually, interestingly, the owner for this project was a financial team. It was important to understand the data they had because it wasn't one database, and we had to do a bit of joining together of just good old-fashioned data engineering to pull what we knew together. You then do the clever agent bit, and you can structure that in a way that any agent, you can read its history of what it's done. So you can check on a random spot basis that it has Googled the right site, and based on what it got back, it's inferred something sensible. And then there's the decision-making process at the end. It was a substantial project, but it wasn't massive. But it's a great example, I think, of how you string these agents together in a way that intuitively just makes sense. It's how you'd build the process if you had enough interns to do it. But let's just do it in a slightly more streamlined way.
It's again thinking of AI as a tool to use and not as a solution or the end goal of what you're trying to achieve, and working with it in that context.
Yeah. And also picking what it's really good at. So AI is really good at reading websites and condensing and summarizing information. It has high reliability in doing that. If you're trying to get AI to add stuff up or do that sort of processing, it's a much harder challenge, actually. And so it's picking your battles you can win. It's also picking a battle like this is ultimately financial accounting, which bit sits where on a P&L. The risk of it being a little wrong, we're not crashing cars, we're not blowing planes up, we're not hurting people on the operating table. It's an accounting process. So it seemed like an appropriate place where we could have a go in a fairly bounded and safe way.
And one of the things that resonated with me, Richard, is that you really highlighted that when we work with people in a process, we tend to accept that 10% or 5% or 12%, depending on the process, could be that error rate. Yet when we're working with systems, we want it to be 100%. That mind shift to say, let's not aim for that, and let's understand our tolerance. Is that 1%? Is that 2%? Is that 3%? And let's work with it. Let's define it. And then everybody is on the same level of expectation. That really resonated with me. It's a brilliant thing to surface. Thank you very much for that.
That was true, isn't it? So if your email advice tool that helps you, you just shrug your shoulders and you move on. So it's actually a great use case because in a sense, it doesn't matter. So pick those use cases rather than, as I say, flying planes or those sorts of things.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about liberating data and the right leaders and use case examples and how can we choose that process and map up the value. Any last tips, advice, guidance for those organizations who still in today's world feel overwhelmed and not sure where to start with the use case of AI? What would those words be?
Like a stuck record, it will be to come back to value. I think it is fine to have an incubator project or something off to the side that gets you started. Many organizations have death by proof of concept. There's hundreds of the damn things. They never get into production, or even worse, they're used but never supported. So yes, you can start with that, but then actually, without any technologists in the room, write down your biggest problems of the day. I hope that many quality professionals and the like are right at the heart of this, because actually in terms of opportunity and risk and problems of the day, the best of that are absolutely at the heart of that. Then how do you solve those problems? And sometimes that's a civils, sometimes that's a training issue, sometimes it's a culture issue, sometimes that's an AI opportunity. So solve it from that way around. There's a different way of thinking how you might solve that. But at that point, you're just engaging on different solutions rather than I have a hammer. What size nail do I want to hit with it? Because I think that ends with tears.
Yeah, I'm going to use that analogy because I really love it. Thank you very much. Richard, this is truly an energizing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of those insights. You've been listening to Richard Corderoy, the CEO of Oakland. Thank you very much for joining Quality Impact Podcast. Thanks to our producer, Luke Nixon. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. I was your host, Rashad Issa. See you next month.